Welcome to the Back in Action podcast, where you're going to hear from me, a spine physician, Dr. John Lavelle, and two coaches, Dusty Holden and Josh Bunch. We're going to help you rethink pain, rebuild strength, and regain function so you can get back to enjoying the things you love in life without limits.
Welcome to the Back in Action podcast, a podcast about strength and conditioning, rehab, for athletes who are in pain, for athletes who don't want to be in pain, athletes who may just be getting started, or athletes who need some new stuff after being decades deep. Today with me, Dr. John Lavelle, Coach Dusty Holden. Today we're talking about momentum, specifically loaded carries, sled pushes, forward lunges, backward walking, all the things momentum-based. And Doctor, I'd like to kick it over to you. Broad, general, what do carries do for spine health?
Well, I think carries are super important. One, they're very functional. We're always carrying something in our life, but they're really good for people in pain with their back because you're not completely loading the spine. So you're strengthening around the spine, your core, your posterior chain, your glutes, your abs, also your shoulders, upper back. It's good for the neck too, trapezius, but you're not specifically putting a load through the spine. So it's a good place not only to start, but to continue on their journey, because you're strengthening around that spine, which we've talked about ad nauseum, but it's easier on the spine.
Well, if I've been told I'm compression intolerant, would this be something that I could get away with, or would this be something that could
100%.
Okay.
And I would argue that first, why did someone say you're compression intolerant? But we'll go there later.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a great place to start for sure. And it's, as I said, you're just not putting that load in the spine. So if there is something that's aggravated with that load, compression through the spine, it's a great way to still strengthen around there, but also with a functional movement that's going to carry over in life.
Dusty, how does it relate to athleticism? So if we're not talking about necessarily just spine health, what are we talking about carries as it relates to maybe field of play or just being athletically minded in general?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's maybe the most transferable because, I mean, in athletics, we're always moving. So this is an instance where we're now moving with weight. Maybe even argue that it's potentially like more beneficial from a functional standpoint than like a static, lift. So I think the big thing too is what maybe is underestimated with carries is like the amount of core strength that you can build by doing, maybe it's a bilateral carry where you're holding an object in each hand, but then to also offset it, it really requires you to activate your core in order to be able to hold the object, in a strong position, especially if it's got some weight to it. But there's so many different variations of carries and ways that you can do it, and objects that you can mix in, that I think from a sports standpoint, if you're not doing them, like you need to be doing them.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna get to how.
I would say with that is what I love about the carries is it's so dynamic and you can vary it so much. So I like when it's offset. If you're doing it in the front rack position and holding something down low, or overhead and holding it by your side, I mean, you're activating virtually every muscle in your body to do that, especially in that dynamic position. But also think about life. If you're carrying the groceries and your baby, or the baby carriage, you're pushing that and holding the groceries in one hand, or holding your baby and lifting up to put the dishes away. I mean, it's so transferable, as Dusty said, to just activities in life. So if you can train it in that controlled setting, and then that's going to carry over to life, especially if you're trying to treat pain, and just teach you that you can do these things and strengthen areas that are going to allow you to keep doing things. Because that's, so important to me, is keeping people functioning and achieving their goals. And this, I think, carries, as well as we're going to talk about with sled pushes and pulls, I think are two of the most important things people can be doing. And you can do them at home. I mean, you can fill a milk jug with water, and that's your thing you're carrying. So you don't need any fancy equipment so much, which is also what's really nice about them.
Dusty, tell me about the different carries. So Dr. Lavelle mentioned a few different versions. Tell me which ones you like to see athletes do, and then we can talk about the different functions it actually does to the body, like what actually happens with a specific carry.
Well, we use kettlebells a lot.
Okay.
We'll carry them in like suitcase positions.
Okay, so that'd be
down to the side.
Okay, is that one in each hand? Is that a bilateral carry?
Both.
Okay,
Both
so we'll
ways.
do bilateral and unilateral.
You know, it's
Okay.
one of those things that we probably do the bilateral little bit more, especially in the beginning, to just because you built to build strength, and then as we get to a certain point, that's where we'll start to introduce different variations.
Like a unilateral.
Yep. So
And
now,
also because of a bilateral, would it technically be easier because you don't have to co-contract? So even though it might have a little bit more weight, it's going to be easier on the body than a unilateral where you do have to co-contract.
right.
Okay.
And then just changing the position. So could be that we're doing the suitcase carry for a bit, and then we move it into like a front rack.
And generally speaking, if I have two dumbbells or kettlebells, two weights by my sides, easier than if I have two weights by my shoulders.
For sure.
Okay.
Because now you're starting to factor in, the shoulder and shoulder mobility, thoracic mobility, all those things are now playing.
And then compressive force is a little different.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then will I take them overhead ever, or do I avoid that?
No, I think that's, I would say like you got kind of maybe step one would be the suitcase.
Okay.
If you want to add a little bit more difficulty to it, bring it up into the front rack, and then for sure the overhead carry is going to be, the tougher one of those three for sure. And probably I would say with each variation, maybe the weight is getting a little bit lighter,
Generally speaking,
as it goes up and overhead. So that's another, an overhead, a bilateral overhead carry is something that I think is it's difficult for one, but can also really, really move the needle for people with shoulder pain, or even if it's just some upper back pain. That's one that you can get to, really help people progress if they've kind of stalled out.
When you're thinking of that, are you thinking in terms of one at a time, and that just based on mobility? So I'm thinking if I'm the sort of athlete who maybe struggles with a little mobility, it does appear to be a little easier for me to get one arm overhead as opposed to both at the same time. Especially, have you noticed that males even particularly struggle with that? And then again, have you noticed that males over 30 really struggle with that? Have they not been doing that?
For sure.
So you would start out, let's say that I had a bilateral carry, cool, maybe I even did a bilateral carry at rack, but when I go to overhead, maybe I start out unilaterally.
Yep.
Okay, and that's going to be probably lighter and probably help with stability.
Yes.
Do I do that? Do I try to aim for that? Let's say that I have a little bit of a shoulder-itis, whatever it may be. Do I try to aim for that in a pain-free state, or am I trying to do that in just a state that I can handle, even if there's discomfort?
Yeah, I would say in the beginning, if you've got shoulder pain, is manageable. Find a position that's manageable, and then that'll also help you as you go along to know, I am getting better because this used to hurt. And there's a lot of different, angles and variations here that you can even play with when you're taking an object overhead to find that position where it's more comfortable or more manageable. But I think for sure one that you should definitely lean in on.
Yeah.
And the goal would be to get it, overhead.
So I was going to ask about that. I see a lot of athletes who will kind of rock back a little bit and then they'll carry it like that. If I'm the guy who carries fantastic suitcase, who carries really well front rack, and then as soon as I go overhead because of limited shoulder mobility, I'm all of a sudden carrying it out a little bit, doing less weight, trying to lean into it. Should I avoid that, and should I work at getting to the appropriate position, which we would say is something like stacking bones or something like wrist over elbow over shoulder?
Yes.
Or should I just go ahead and carry it in that sort of awkward position?
No, that's where I would say, all right, hey, here's an opportunity to really lean in on this. So it may be that you pivot altogether, and now you're going to maybe a half kneeling position, and you're pressing from a more controlled. A standing overhead press, especially unilateral, it can be challenging.
But arguably a carry could come, a single arm overhead carry could come before a press simply because it is isometric. So loaded appropriately, we could argue that could come first.
And I would say too, backing up, there's a very high chance that when you move into the front rack, you're going to start to notice if there's going to be overhead issues. So that's not, I wouldn't say, very rarely will you find somebody that does this very well, comes to here, it's
Does
very well, and then all of a sudden we have, this situation where the weight is way out in front. You would start to see this lower, kind of front rack position.
Yeah.
And then even when you moved up, maybe it's the can't do it, or as the elbow comes up, there is pain that they feel. So I think that's an opportunity to kind of assess it, assess the overhead position and see, okay, before we even get there, chances are, this is going to be potentially a position that we struggle with.
You just explained scaling. So essentially, if I wanted to do overhead, the scale is, can you do them at your size?
There.
Then can I do them at rack? Then can I go overhead?
Yes.
Okay.
Why do you think males, as you mentioned, have harder time getting up overhead?
That's a great question. I think that what I see a lot of is we move a lot here and right at roughly shoulder level. There's a lot of pushing here. In fact, how many guys do you talk to that are like, I can bang out 100 push-ups? We don't really ask what those push-ups look like, but you hear that a lot. I can do 200 push-ups, and you say something like, when's the last time you tried a handstand? 20 or 30 years ago. And the highest they're reaching, and again, this is after I've talked to just athletes for decades, is just a cabinet. It really truly is never going overhead. Mm-hmm. And just that lack of doing it, it gets sleepy, then it gets tight, and then it gets to where you give me a 25-year-old who's rough in some flexion range of motion, maybe 3 months to get that range of motion back. Mm-hmm. Give me a 70-year-old, it's going to take a while.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. And it's going to be a lot of creative patterning. It's going to be a lot of, can I get that scapula to go with the posterior tilt? Because I think we see a lot of an anterior scapular tilt.
Yep.
I think we see a lot of inappropriate push-ups. I think you see a lot of athletes when they do a push-up, they break at about elbows at the sides. You'll see the shoulder fall forward. And we have a lot of athletes that are like, well, I'm touching my shoulders to the ground. When in fact, you're reaching your shoulders to the ground, or you're reaching your face to the ground instead of actually doing an appropriate push-up. So we see a lot of that sort of braggadocious thing where people are like, here's what I think a push-up is. Mm-hmm. Put somebody on the rings where it's theoretically a unilateral push-up. Now let's see what it looks like. Stuff like that. So that's why, but I think that comes with, what's the T-spine doing? Yeah. Like, can I actually move the T-spine, or have they been fear-mongered, like we talk about in almost every episode, to where you can't open your T-spine at all? Well, you can't press if you don't at least flare a little bit. We'll hear that, like rib flare is always bad. Yeah. Well, you really can't press if you don't have something going on there. Mm-hmm. And then you see a lot of tight lats, a lot of inability to hang, so on and so forth.
I asked that as we hadn't even talked about this, but you kind of answered the question exactly what I was trying to lead you into, is because you can see that with that shoulder. People can see that they're kind of rolled forward and won't be able to get their shoulder up because, like you said, they're not doing a lot of reaching overhead, so all this gets tight. That's why they get rotator cuff strains. The supraspinatus specifically get tendinopathy in, because when they try to reach over, they get irritated because they don't have that full range of motion.
That's right.
But it's harder to see in your hips and low back.
That's right.
But the same thing's going on when your hip flexors are tight, your pelvis gets pulled anteriorly. You have to strain more of your back, and that's when you irritate the joints in the low back, those facet joints we've talked about with arthritic change. So I loved your answer, because you see it in the shoulder and it's harder to see it down low, and people wonder why there's nothing really wrong on their MRI or imaging, when so much of it is just muscle ligament tension, either in their back, in their shoulders, straining their neck, or like you mentioned, the thoracic spine, mid-back, but also in the low back. There's not always a true immediate injury that caused it. It's over time from repetitive sitting, lack of mobility, and that's where we're going to see with these movement activities that can all help open that all up.
And then to what you said, the shoulder is very free. I mean, when the shoulder is moving well, it's going to go all over the place. You have a lot of circumduction about the shoulder, but then you get into the hip, and while it's robust, while it's going to do a lot of stuff, it does have less. Yeah. So you can hide a little bit in there, and with the shoulder, you get, in PT, it's called John DeCross syndrome, where one muscle becomes a little too tight, another muscle becomes a little weak, and then all of a sudden, that's predominantly for men, the pec minor gets pulled down, pulls the shoulder in, and then it creates all these different issues. Now, what you said earlier I thought was cool. You said about moving the weight out, and I've actually seen you carry, like holding a kettlebell out in front of you. So tell me about the carries that I guess are a little, I feel like we see farmer carries.
Yeah,
pretty
I would
often.
say that when you see them.
But I don't see a lot of hug carries. I don't see a lot of, like I think you were the first one I saw hold a kettlebell straight arm in front of you and take a walk. And that is a nightmare if you've ever tried that. What do those kind of carries do?
Well, I think anytime you move an object away from your center of mass, the difficulty is going to increase the further the object gets away from you. So I think it just comes down to really just a activation. I mean, all the different muscles, the further that you move the object away, the activation that's required, and even just neurologically, like, man, you got to be, focused and concentrating on what you're doing. So, and it doesn't take a lot of weight,
right,
I mean, you could take a 16-pound kettlebell, hold it out in front, and begin walking with it, and you're going to feel it, after 20 yards.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's just mixing it in as many different variations. Now all of a sudden, now I got the bicep under tension. I'm just recruiting more muscles, and at the end of the day, like, that's what we're all about.
That's right.
If we can get a greater muscular demand, it's like, all right, we found something that it works. So I think that's what's really cool about carries is it's one of those, people think in their mind carries, and like we said, you see the suitcase carry the most common, but it's really, the variations are endless. You can do so many things. Even like we do a lot of sandbag carries.
Yeah,
and the doc does not like that sandbag carry.
What is it about the sandbag you dislike,
It is friggin' heavy.
It is heavy. Well,
He really doesn't like going over 100 pounds. And I think a lot of it has to do with positionally, like he has to get so much lower, to get under the bag and getting it into the right position.
You can't just use the bicep.
And you got it like bench press arms, so it's not like you can reach you're kind of like step in there.
I think the big thing is that it exposes, like, you're vulnerable. Like, it's a 100%. Position that you feel vulnerable in. Your back doesn't feel as strong, maybe your core doesn't feel as strong. So what's the natural tendency when you get into something like that is, I'm not going to do that.
That's right.
I don't want to get injured or I felt some pain, so I'm just going to push it away.
Tomorrow we're doing the 150-pound sand carries.
Of course. We'll get it on camera just to make sure. One thing that's interesting to point out with that, though, there's exercises that I qualify as exercises that feel hard and are hard. Yeah. They should be dosed appropriately. Yes. But then there are exercises that feel hard that aren't hard. So a 100-pound sandbag carry really isn't hard. No. And if we can set our mindset up for that, because think about your deadlift. Like, you deadlift 800 pounds, 850. So you deadlift a lot more than 100 pounds. But when you go to pick up a 100-pound sandbag and it feels horrible. Mm-hmm. But if you think about that to how tuned up the body is, being able to handle hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and then backing it way down to something that just feels heavy, not only can you do that more often, but if you're in the right mindset of it, you can go after that with a little bit more intensity.
Well, and I think what is underestimated is, like, let's say that you are the guy that, like, maybe you do have a 500-pound deadlift, but all you do is deadlift, and then you've, like, plateaued and you can't figure out how do I get to 550. You keep doing the thing that you've always been doing, and you're overloading and deloading and doing it, but just mixing in, like, something like a sandbag carry like we're talking about. And because of the position being, again, weak and vulnerable, now you're maybe able to break through, some of those plateaus that you've just been stuck on, because all of a sudden we've just exposed, a weakness. You're so strong in that, deadlift position, but now if we have to get you lower, and we have to get a little bit of flexion in the upper back, it's just things that you're not used to.
Well, then we're working stamina. So to do a 1 rep, 2 rep, 5 rep deadlift is great pure strength. If we're going to carry if we're going to hug carry 100 pounds for 40 steps for 50 yards, that's all stamina.
Yep.
So it's a completely different component of fitness that we're now been able to work that will unlock a bigger deadlift, a bigger back squat, so on and so forth.
For sure.
How does it work with the gait, doctor? So when you see it, does often doing carries improve the gait of the patient or the athlete?
Yeah, because when we'll just stay with the farmer's carry, where it's just when you're carrying dumbbells or kettlebells or something, whatever it is at home by your side like this, you have to engage your whole core. So your hip abductors, so you're preventing your hips from swaying out. Your adductors activating them so your hips aren't swaying out. And I see that so much where people, as their core gets weak, their glute medius get weak, their IT band gets tight because they're constantly swaying their hips side to side. So what do they come in with? Well, the hip doctor said I got trochanteric bursitis. Well, it's because every time you take a step, or if I'm standing here and I'm standing on one leg, that's like when you're walking, the trochanter, which is the bone on the side of the hip, basically, is rubbing against that tensor fasciae lata muscle, or an IT band, iliotibial band, which is a ligament that runs around the side of your leg, is constantly getting rubbed against that. So you develop some swelling in there, or inflammation. And so they always just want an injection. But if you're doing that suitcase carry, you're keeping that muscle in alignment. So when you're walking, your hips aren't swaying out.
Yeah.
So on the catwalk, you may want to shake that booty a little bit. But when we're walking day to day, you want to be walking in that kind of straight line.
Yeah.
So you're not throwing off your pelvis, irritating that IT band, which then if your pelvis is off and swaying side to side again, you're going to start to irritate that low back.
And when you do a single, so when I said, and obviously when you do farmer carry, or when you do a bilateral carry, but when you do a unilateral carry, you get a lot more QL on the opposite side.
Yeah,
right. So it's one way to hit the QL, and we know, I'm pretty sure the studies will show that, for instance, if you want, we were talking about a bigger deadlift, but if you want a bigger deadlift, bigger back squat, if you can carry more, the QL contributes something like 15% of your back squat or your deadlift. Being better at carries or stronger at carries transfer to stronger at other things that are stationary.
Yep.
And that'll work in life too.
Well, I would say even with carries, like in older clientele, it would be balance, because now you're moving with weight, external weight is just an improvement, in balance. You're going to strengthen ligaments and tendons and, all the things basically downstream. By now you're walking and you having to control the momentum, so you kind of are fighting a little bit of that, especially the weight gets moving. So another one that I think is really, really important, and one of the reasons that we see such a big issue, and again, a little bit of an older senior population, is balance, is because it's just not training it.
That's right.
Balance is a skill.
That's right. 100%.
Like anything, if you don't do it, you're going to lose it. So
that's right.
Well, you mentioned it with the front carries, with that neuromuscular communication. It's that neurokinetic movement. Your nervous system is getting trained how to send that signal appropriately to the muscles so they fire appropriately kinetically. And so if you're training that, like you said, you're going to improve your proprioception, which is what controls our balance. So if your nervous system is being trained and you're going to gain that better proprioception, thus that better balance.
And with what you're talking about also, that's the difference between a voluntary muscle and a non-voluntary. So you can actively flex the bicep, but a lot of athletes don't necessarily know how to do that with the midline. And some of the midline spinal erectors, you really can't do that.
Well, these smaller intrinsic muscles, you have to train those.
That's right.
And keep activating them. I talk about the multifidus a lot and how we see that loss of muscle mass in the posterior chain muscles when we look at MRI, and that causes a lot of back pain. And because it's those small multifidus muscles that often are gone as we get older because we're not training them, but those do so much support for a spine, especially in those first 15 to 20 degrees of movement. But even a carry, you're activating that multifidus, that spine, to keep that spine in good alignment. It's just going to, not only help you get out of pain, but it's going to prevent that degeneration that we see as you lose that muscle.
Dusty, how often and how far? So we talked about the variety. We know to vary it. How often should I carry each week? How far should I carry each time?
I think minimum you have to carry at least once a week.
Okay.
But
once a week in my program is good.
Yes.
Okay. And we said to vary it up.
I personally implement carries in sometimes at least 2, maybe 3 times a week.
Okay.
But that's just I love carries, and I love to just change the variations and mix it between bilateral and unilateral and the objects. So
how many sets will I do when I do that, and how far will I carry?
Well, I would say maybe 3 to 4 sets, and you're looking at anywhere from 15 to 20 yards.
Okay. Now, when you say that you do them 1 to 3 times a week, do I do it as a warm up? Is this part of my primary? Is this part of an auxiliary? Is this a superset? How do you normally do them, or how would you recommend that I start doing them?
Well, I would say, if you haven't been doing them, it could easily be implemented into your warm up, especially if you're a little bit pinched on time. but I typically do them as a like auxiliary movement.
So warm up, primary, and then their auxiliary
At the end.
Okay.
And then I would say, like, if I do it 3 times, once a week, it's probably implemented into like some conditioning. So a little bit like where I'm under fatigue, heart rate's up, and now I'm having to move, point A to point B.
And since we said they're low impact, it could couple something nicely that could be a higher impact. So, for instance, if I were to let's say jump.
Yeah.
So if we know that jumping increases bone density, so I jump, cool. But then as something that's a much lower impact that may not cost me as much, I can carry in with some sort of jump conditioning or plyometric conditioning.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Big good way. What you'll notice too with carrying is, your heart rate will get up.
100%.
Especially if it's a little bit of weight. You'll notice like, wow, it has there is definitely intensity there. But like you said, very low impact. I love carries on like an active rest day. That's maybe you're doing some mobility and you're just wanting to move around a little bit, throw some carries in.
Let's go with a good metric. So what's a metric to let me know that I've arrived? So if I start out with carries, let's not, we're going to start out light. We know that. We shouldn't start out with something that's heavy, but when do I know that I have a good carry? And we can talk about specifically the farmer carry. I think it gets a little bit esoteric when we talk about rack and overhead. What's a good weight for you to be able to carry?
In a farmer carry, I'd say your body weight.
Okay.
Body weight, your body weight farmer carry. I think that's pretty.
So a 200-pound guy needs to be able to carry 200 pounds, 100-pound kettlebell on each one.
Yeah.
Now, if I do a single side, should that change in terms of if I have just right arm carry, should I be able to carry more since I've set the other kettlebell down, or is it still going to be 100?
I would say it's going to be pretty close. I mean, you may be, some people, I think that's going to probably be very individual based.
Okay.
But that's also something to note, like if one side is significantly, stronger than the other, well, there you go. You just discovered a little bit of an imbalance that now you can train that out.
And like Dr. Lavelle said, if you have that weird catwalk sort of style walk that you'll see a lot of times come up, just doing more of them tends to strengthen that hip structure so that goes away.
Yep.
Or the navicular drop at the feet. One thing I watch when I do carries is you might not see it until you load it a little bit, and then all of a sudden 100%. The ankles drop in and it gets really strained.
For sure.
And that's a good idea to have somebody with you behind you, like a coach, being like, hey man, this is great. Keep doing this, and then you start to see the feet strengthen. You start to see an arch come into that.
Well, and that's another thing I was going to say is even like barefoot carries, implementing that in. Again, the variations, and that's what we've talked about this before. Don't box yourself in, and don't be afraid to try new things. And training should be fun. So switch it up, change it up, try different things. And, if you're dealing with some like foot pain, maybe it's plantar fasciitis, something like that. Get out of your shoes, and train barefoot. That could be, some of what's contributing to, the pain that you're having.
Sure.
And I think we don't spend enough time, out of shoes.
Well, I think we can talk about carry. We keep talking about this, but I want to make sure that we hit all the pieces before we even move on to the sled. But you taught me this again. Another thing that I saw you do, and I was like, this is brilliant. Carries work the grip. Mm-hmm. We know that grip is a direct correlate to good health.
Right.
But man, there's a cheap and easy way to get grip work with carries, and then I've seen you have a piece of rope that you'll tie around the kettlebell, and you grab a light kettlebell and you put that piece of rope around it, and that's the hardest thing ever.
Well, and now all of a sudden this
pendulum effect, you have an earthquake effect.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, you're just introducing new things, new ways to train, and I think that one is really good, especially if you're in kind of a situation where you don't have just endless access to a bunch of weight. Is now how can you make that 16-pound kettlebell feel more challenging, more difficult?
So much
well, suspend it from a rope, and
that's right.
I would say you probably accomplished what you're looking to do.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, now let's talk about sleds. So when we're talking sled pushes, sled drags, and so on and so forth, let's talk to the good doctor about this. Do you like that more than the carry, than the hug carry?
I love sleds.
Do you? Do you like
I
push
think
or
they're
pulling
phenomenal.
better?
I think they're both
Really?
important.
There's not one that's better than the other for you that you like more.
I mean, forward's easier.
Okay.
But I think I like the backward because it's not something you do as often.
When you do
And
the
it's
backward
super,
sled,
especially for back pain, I love.
really? What,
Because
tell me
you're
about
working that posterior chain. You're
Okay.
working those glutes, the erector spinae, those back muscles, hamstrings when you're pulling backwards.
Yeah.
And it could just be walking backwards to start. But that backward movement, if you have knee pain, it's offsetting those knees so you don't have as much like patellar discomfort, which I'm dealing with now on my left knee. So doing that backward movement is a good accessory movement to start to utilize more to offset knee pain, or like I said, in the back. Again, it's the same with the carries. You're not getting that axial load, so it's a good way to train those posterior muscles in a different way. So I hadn't done backward sleds till maybe 2 or 3 years ago when we started doing it. But
Yeah.
I love it because it's just training those posterior muscles in a different, more unique way.
When you say posterior, so that our listeners know, are you talking about my hands are on a sled or on part of the apparatus and I'm taking short stutter steps? Or are you talking about holding a rope or having something wrapped
Either
around
way.
you? Okay.
So I often do it with just the kind of like the harness wrapped around me, like a weight belt,
So that you
strapped
can
in, and
maybe
I'm
do
pulling
more
it
weight.
backwards. Or you could hold it, but I usually do it with the harness.
So you get a longer step too if you have a harness around you, so
Yeah,
you don't get a
it's
short
easier.
stutter step. Okay, got it. Dusty, elaborate a little bit on how that works differently in terms of the musculature around the knee or the posterior when you do a backwards.
Well, I think like he said, so if you're forward pushing, you're engaging more like quad knee.
Yep.
So if you've got, maybe it is some tendonitis or knee pain, or you're coming back from some type of knee injury, sled pushes are really, really good, especially forward. But I think reverse as well, because you're just switching. One's, anterior, the front, and then the pull is going to be more posterior, getting the hamstrings, glutes, back. We love them both because it's like, all right, we can hit both, both sides of the body.
Yeah.
And then much like the carry, you can move it in different positions. It can be that you're holding on to the sled, and then other times maybe you're using a TRX strap and you're doing more of like a row, or a harness like the doctor said, where now you've got a little bit more distance between you and the sled. So I think that allows you to be able to change it up. You could we do a lot of like lateral,
So frontal plane movement?
frontal.
Yep.
So again, it's so many different options. And I think that's what's cool about the sled too. And really space-wise, you're looking at about the same distance. You get a 15, 20-yard sled push, about the same distance of what the carry is. And that's really, you can get a lot of good work in a distance like that.
Before we get too much more into sleds, like what does the kind of sled matter? There seems to be a ton of different sleds.
There's a lot. I don't know. I think
do I need to get lower? Do I need to be higher? Is there a difference really in what I should, or should it be this?
I think they're all going to feel different, and you're probably going to have preferences, and typically going to be based around which one's easier. The ones that you like.
Yep.
But I think for the most part, to me, there's different styles, but a sled's a sled. You're pushing, it across the ground. So outside of like the torque sled that's on wheels, that one's more different, and you can a lot of different variations with it. But I just think like with a sled, it's really endless. It's another exercise where it lowers, I think, the possibility of injury. So if it's an injury pain situation, I've had people who are in pretty severe pain that were very apprehensive to do any lifting, but put them on a sled and they just go right after it, and all of a sudden they just feel more comfortable, like they're not having to think about it, as much. So that fear, meter for them has lowered, and now they're just moving, and they don't even realize, the amount of weight that they're doing, one, but even the muscle groups that they're potentially training that are the same as what this lift over here is going to train, but that's scary. This is not. So it kind of can be sometimes an entry point. I've used the sled a lot for that, an entry point to even back up and say, look, you just pushed 200 pounds, 20 yards.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be okay, in picking up this 45 pound barbell.
Yeah, sure.
So,
that's
and
right.
just kind of helping them, really connect the dots. And again, it's really just fear is paralyzing, So to be able to it's like the box jump, we if we can get them to jump, if it's only 3 inches.
Yeah,
but we can very quickly turn 3 into 9.
Or build confidence with a calf raise. Can you do this? Can you walk on your toes? Like, you just
and
keep stepping it
and
up.
every
That's
time
right.
you can see the confidence increasing in the athlete, just from that one, movement to the next. So I think, again, like the sled is really just a tool that, again, we use a lot, and it could be, entry level all the way up to the, elite, professional athlete.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're watching any of the training that they're doing in, high level sports, most of the time you see a sled push.
That's right.
And I think we're talking about, when you ask different type of sleds, for my friends in the Northeast, we're not talking about a snow sled that you go use in the snow.
Not Rocky
We're
Ford.
talking, because some of the
Best
listeners
Rocky ever, by the way.
100%.
Okay, just making sure
But
we're in agreement.
there is the type of sled for our listeners. It's a piece of equipment that you load with weights and push or pull.
Now, we were talking about central centralization before, and how there's no damage. There might not be any damage whatsoever, but I fear things like hinging a lot. Whenever I think of hinge, that's going to get me. And if I hinge with a barbell, the idea of hinging, because I'm so sensitized to that, game over. But what is a sled? You're sort of in that hinge position. That sounds like, to me, that could be something, a really good way, like Dusty was saying, to get that sensitized athlete to be able to work the posterior chain with no real threat, or at least not as much as they might perceive.
Right. And it can go as slow or fast as they want it to, like you really control the speed. That's another thing that I think is, wildly beneficial, is like slow that sled down and make it, a short, step. It doesn't have to be these long strides.
Slow it down because I'm just moving slower, or slow it down because I'm going to put some weight on there that I can't go quickly.
Yeah, it could be both.
Okay.
But I think that's, you can really change up the speeds, and you'll notice, it has a massive impact on the way that it feels. And again, just another opportunity to switch it up and try new things and do new things. And if it is a pain situation, I would just stay on that sled, for, it could be a few weeks, till whenever you feel like, okay, I'm now pushing, 200, 300 pounds, and I can pull it. I think I'm ready to, move to this next step. I haven't had any pain. I'm feeling better. So it's just another, really, really good tool.
And we talked about sprinting, even how good sprinting can be, but how also, again, if you haven't sprinted for 10 years, probably not the best idea to just walk out the door and start sprinting.
Right.
But one way that you can make them safe as a coach is you could have somebody maybe run up a hill so that they can't go as fast.
Right.
That's a really good idea to calm that down. But also, you can load a sled. So somebody who feels pretty good and feels like they wanted to start doing that, instead of just dead off sprinting tomorrow, what if you loaded up the sled so that when you sprinted, you didn't really sprint? Yep. Okay.
Love it.
Got it.
And I think that's so important to get people to the point where they can sprint. Dusty and I have talked about that. That's kind of a life skill, to be able to get up and run from something, or run out of a burning house, or run to catch your child, or
But
something
not
like
if
that.
you haven't done it for 20 years.
100%. Well, that's what led me to that, is, training that by, if you haven't done it, start with, a farmer's carry, a sled push, and work your way up. There was a cool study I just read the other day on on incorporating sprinting into your programming. If you do 30-second sprints just for 5 or 6 times, you increase your human growth hormone, HGH, output by over 400%.
Say that one more time.
You, by incorporating sprinting in your training program for up to 2 hours after you've done those 30-second interval sprints, you increase your HGH output by over 400%.
Got it.
So imagine if you incorporate sprinting and then go lift some weights. I mean, you're utilizing that HGH. I think that's pretty
Tell
pretty
our
cool.
listeners what is the main effects that I'm going to see, the main beneficial effects that I'll see out of growth hormones.
Well, you're going to improve basically muscle growth.
Okay.
So human growth hormone is in our body naturally. You see it a lot in younger children. Younger children, that's what our body utilizes as a protein to increase our body's development. So cell growth, muscle growth. And so you see it, a lot of people will, high-level athletes will use HGH illegally to increase muscle mass, muscle strength, but it's naturally in our body and it helps our cells develop and muscles grow. And so if you can tap into that as an athlete or just a patient that needs to get stronger, it's going to help with that muscle hypertrophy and growth.
Tell me about, so if maybe for our listeners that they or somebody that they care for has Parkinson's, isn't a key feature of Parkinson's losing that retropulsion, that ability to be able to move backwards? I start to lose that ability, and that's where we see a lot of falls. Any step backwards becomes a problem. Couldn't working with the sled at least strengthen the confidence of that backward movement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just walking backwards. So just training that, as I mentioned earlier, that you're going to regain some of that proprioception and thus balance. So starting just working backwards. If you're elderly, just starting to incorporate that is going to help with that proprioception and balance to limit those falls. I mean, you'll see that in Parkinson's just by taking those first couple steps. It'll be a really, when they get up from a chair, that really stutter step, and you can tell their balance is way off, let alone trying to go balance.
That's right.
But absolutely, neurologically, you're going to just start making new circuitry. And we've seen that in Parkinson's disease, that you can, it's called neuroplasticity or neurosprouting, where you can grow new neurons, new nerve endings to sprout out to retrain how that kinetics of the body work and those muscles. So, but you have to train it.
This is where when you're working it with Parkinson's, you will try to do things like obstacle courses. We don't just carry in a straight line. We carry in a figure
I think has become pretty popular with Parkinson's.
Yes, that's right. Now with sleds, like we talked about with the carries, 1 to 3 times a week, how often should I be pushing or pulling the sled? How often should I be working a sled into my program? And should it be a warm-up? Should it be the primary heavy? Or should it be more of an auxiliary?
Well, I would say sleds are a little bit harder to come by than kettlebells.
Okay.
So if you have access to sleds, I would be doing it at least once a week.
Okay.
So I think here's the other thing too. I think there's, in cases where you don't have a sled, it could be that you're pushing like a 45-pound plate.
Oh, that's the worst thing ever.
And that can be pushed on turf. It can be pushed on, rubber flooring. You're going to have more friction on the rubber flooring. And so a 45 will probably feel like a 300-pound sled.
That's right.
But, it comes back down to, it's not, what you're doing or what you're using as much as it's how you're doing it.
Sure.
And using what you have available. So
you could fill a wheelbarrow and do it in the driveway. If you're on a walker, if you have a walker in the house, you could put a little weight on that and push the walker, put tennis balls on it. So there's ways to make a sled. You don't have to buy it. It's just pushing an object.
But about roughly once a week, and I do roughly 30 yards. How far do I want to push that?
I would say, again, anywhere, depending on the weight of the sled and how much weight you're moving, it could be anywhere from 10 to 30 yards. Lighter weights are going to be a little further distances, and then it could be, also if you're doing sprint work, we use that a lot in the speed school is, sled pushes. I mean, empty sleds. We're not even adding any weight. It's just about, resistance running, more or less. So I think, the distances can vary, but anywhere they will be effective at 10 yards and up.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we talked about not only the momentum of a carry, how we're actually not just standing there and lifting something, but also of a sled. But tell me about like a lunge. What is the benefit of doing a walking lunge specifically instead of doing a lunge in place that may just be a reverse lunge? What am I going to get? And should I be doing lunges in terms of forward movement? We're not going to talk about frontal movement. I feel like that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But in terms of frontal movement, is that more dangerous? Is that better for me?
Well, I think they both have their, their purpose. And obviously moving, much like carrying, is going to recruit, more just muscular tension. And neurologically, it's going to be more challenging as now you're moving or you're lunging with an object. Could be that you're holding it. Could be it's on your back.
Or just doing it.
It could be body weight.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then now you're starting balance is, starting to play in as you're now moving through space. So.
And there's a deceleration component to me taking a step forward and continuing to take a step forward. It's similar to running where I'm constantly not falling.
Yeah.
Whereas a lunge, especially if it's loaded, I'm constantly resisting that weight instead of staying in the same spot.
Yeah, and exactly. If you're using weight, again, when you get that pendulum effect, now the weight's kind of swaying and moving. So now all of a sudden the core is really turned on, depending on the position that you have it in. But I think they, both are effective.
Would you start if I was wanting to? Let's say that I would forward lunge with pain, could I just simply not do that forward movement? Do a standing in
Static.
place? Yeah. Do a split squat.
Well, that's
and then work up to that. Is it maybe that I don't have the strength in that deceleration, or is it maybe that I don't have the proprioception when I take a step out? I'm just wonky.
Yeah, it could be. That's what I would say is start with a static.
Okay.
Lunge hold.
Got it.
And those, at 20 seconds,
oh, it's horrible.
20, 30 seconds, you're going to feel that.
Is this a way that I could also stack movements? So, like for instance, if I wanted to do a unilateral carry, could I just do a walking lunge with a dumbbell in one hand? I mean, maybe I couldn't go as heavy as I could on a carry, but am I not getting the same thing out of that I would in a carry?
And probably more challenging.
Way much more challenging.
Yeah, much more challenging. Okay, so that's a way that I could stack movement patterns and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think that, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
Training that deceleration is just as important as everything else we're talking about too, especially, when we're talking about athletes. So many people don't focus on that deceleration. So when you're sprinting and learning how to stop, this is going to all train that with just doing, that lunge and learning how to control your body in that deceleration movement. I know you guys do that a lot in speed school.
Well, and here's the thing. We're not just talking about athletes. We're talking about, anyone. It's like you're walking through your house, a dog runs in front of you, and all of a sudden you're trying not to trip over the dog, and you have to come to a stop. I mean, we're decelerating on a daily basis, no matter who we are. So again, it's something that everybody needs to be training.
And how many people, when they have to stop fast or stop quick or slip on ice, hurt their knee, their patella gets strained, or their knee, they tear an ACL or something like that, or hurt their hip because they haven't trained those muscles on how to stop. And so but your muscles have that neuromuscular connection. So if you've been training that, you're going to be able to catch yourself if you slip on the stairs or slip in the shower, if you've been training that. So it's all injury prevention, not only recovery.
A theme that we keep talking about, what I'm hearing is if I start doing those forward lunges and I feel that discomfort, that's not a sign that there could be damage. That's definitely not a sign to never do that. That's first and foremost, I found something. And then second, I need to work up to being able to do that. Maybe I go back and I regress to being able to do a split hold, but it doesn't mean, okay, that hurt, don't ever do it again.
I would say it's actually more of a sign to do it.
Okay, got it. So now, if we have carries, what I essentially want to take away from our carries is I'll carry at least once a week in a variety of different ways. Either it's two objects, two implements down by the side, or one maybe rack position at my shoulders, maybe even overhead. I want to do that at least once up to 3 times a week.
Yep.
I'm going to do that somewhere around 3 to 4 sets of roughly 15 to 30 yards or so. If I have a sled, I'm going to do that probably once a week, but more is totally fine. And it's the same deal. I need to vary it in terms of forward push, a backward drag, holding the sled, using some sort of harness, light and fast, or low and slow, really heavy. And if I would start to work those in, not only would I see improvement in maybe my back squat, maybe my deadlift, but anything else that may sort of come up in the wild.
Yeah, for sure.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Thank you for watching. Join us for much more where that came from. And when you get a chance, follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Back in Action Podcast.